Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for braving the traffic and the parking and coming to Fresno State. I'm Honora Chapman, the Interim Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities. And on behalf of President Joseph Castro and Provost Saul Jimenez Sandoval, I wish to welcome all the faculty, staff, and students, community members, and especially our visiting scholars who have come from so far, all over the country and the world, and our remarkable keynote speakers, Reverend James Lawson, an eminent leader of the civil rights movement who worked alongside Dr. King, Dolores Huerta, transformative activist who continues to fight for justice, Ramsey J. Jr., one of our own STAR alumni, and Nipun Mehta, an inspirational human being who lives Gandhi's teachings. We wish to thank our wonderful philosophy professor, Dr. Veena Howard. Yay! She's been working tirelessly for over a year to bring together all the scholars that you've witnessed today and tomorrow as well. She's also a remarkable teacher. She's a beloved teacher. She has been an award-winning teacher who has been asked by the students to speak here in this hall for Fresno State Talks. Her students love her in her classes. She's also an amazing scholar of Gandhi and Asian religious traditions. And she inspires her students to reach new intellectual heights through how she teaches her classes and with the speakers whom she brings to campus for events such as this amazing conference. And yet she's found time to author books. She has written her own book as well as editing books of other scholars' essays and numerous articles as well. Her most recent volume is called A Handbook of Indian Philosophy and Gender with Bloomsbury. And she has a major Oxford bibliography on Gandhi. Dr. Howard has been asked to speak at various international conferences focusing on the issues of peace, interreligious dialogue, and social justice. To ensure that so many great speakers could attend this celebration of Gandhi's legacy, Dr. Howard has worked tirelessly to secure the support of many campus and community organizations. We are thankful to the Ethics Center and Dr. Andy Fiala, the Henry Madden Library and Dean Hornbuckle, the President's Commission for Human Relations and Equity, and Francine Oputa, with the Cross-Cultural and Gender Center, and many departments and community partners. We are especially grateful to our major donors, the JP and Renu Sethi Foundation and the Uberoi Foundation. Thank you so much, both of you. Just a little background. JP and Renu Sethi lived in the San Joaquin Valley before moving to San Diego. Their philanthropic foundation is committed to helping those in need through organizations such as Poverello House and the Marjorie Mason Center. JP has said that in his childhood, he was deeply influenced by Gandhi's teachings, and he believes that it is fitting that Gandhi's teachings of nonviolence and uplift of everyone be taught to our students. We thank the JP and Renu Sethi Foundation so much for their generous support. Those are our students, Ingrid and Liz, who are presenting their gifts. We are very grateful as well to the Uberoi Foundation for Religious Studies, which devotes itself to supporting various scholarly projects of Dharma traditions in India and has given a generous grant for this conference. Two of the members of the Board of Trustees, Mrs. Anu Bhatia and Mrs. Jyoti Bhatia, have come all the way from New Delhi, India to participate in the conference. Thank you so much. Thank you. We genuinely are honored by all of you here, and we are grateful now to introduce Dr. Veena Howard to the stage to provide a preview of this conference, including her own thoughts as a Gandhi scholar on Gandhi's legacy, as well as to introduce our esteemed speaker tonight, Reverend James Lawson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Gandhi conference. We did it. We are here. I am so grateful to our Dean, Dr. Honora Chapman's kind introduction and remarks. We can't go wrong when we have leaders like her and our own Associate Dean, Dr. Laporte, I don't know whether he's here, and our provost and president. I have support of them so much throughout this process. So thank you, Dean Chapman, appreciate it. So this conference, as you saw, the program is truly interdisciplinary, right? And colleagues and students, as you saw even today, across the departments and disciplines have supported me. It does take a lot of work to pull them all together, but it has been fun. And I am so humbled by the help of so many. But I would like to give my special thanks to Dr. Fiala. Are you here, Dr. Fiala? Can you stand up? He's the director of Ethics Center and professor in the Department of Philosophy. He has been truly a partner support in this endeavor. Thank you so much. I would also like to acknowledge the support of Dr. Francine Oputa. She's chair of the President's Commission for Human Relations and Equity, where I also have served for the last almost 4 years. And she also director of Cross-Cultural and Gender Center. What she has done for the last year or so, she has guided me and mentored me through the planning of this conference. And she will be moderating this evening's event. So after our speakers have spoken, then she's going to do the question and answer as well. So we are, like Dr. Dean Chapman mentioned, that we are grateful for the sponsorships of so many on-campus and community organizations, and to our generous donors. Without their support, it would have not been possible to put such a conference event together with this kind of size and scope. We need financial support for doing good work, believe it or not. We do believe. So Gandhi lived in poverty. We know that, right? But he knew that any social work requires resources. He was smart. He kept his rich friends near him so that he could be supported by them. So thank you, our donors. Appreciate that very much. It's so wonderful to see many of our campus leaders, deans, community members, faculty, and students here. Thanks for coming this evening. So dear students, this is all about you, right? Always is. Universities are for you. The sign-in sheets are in the back, just in case you're looking for extra credit. And you'll get opportunity to ask questions to our eminent speakers. So please take notes and be ready to ask questions. So I extend my welcome to all of you, especially to our keynote speakers and esteemed scholars, and who have traveled long distances to participate in the conference from India, Detroit, Virginia, Hawaii, North Carolina, Georgia, Oregon, and many other states. Could you please stand and be recognized, my dear scholars? Thank you so much. So the reason I want you to look at them, because they're going to speak tomorrow. So you have to come tomorrow to listen to their talks and learn from them. So keeping in spirit of Gandhi's own life and works, we wanted to make this commemoration events of Gandhi's 150th birthday available to all people. So there is no registration fees. It's open to public, all the events. And we wanted to make it available to our community members and students. After all, we are studying Gandhi. In today's world, Gandhi's teachings can offer tools and constructive programs for addressing our modern day challenges, and we will learn as we go through this conference. Before we invite Reverend James Lawson to the podium for sharing his words of wisdom, and Dr. Mary Elizabeth King to offer her reflections, I would like to provide a brief context about the impetus of such a conference. So as you have noticed, this conference is not a typical academic conference where only scholars are invited, right? Exclusive. We know about those, AAR. The conference is sort of hybrid, as my research itself, which combines scholarly analysis with practical applications. I have been working on the project of Gandhi's global legacy for the last few years, and I'm surprised by his far-reaching global influence. So last summer in Singapore, where I was invited to give a talk at a very high-power conference, I met a 93-year-old Muslim businessman and philanthropist. He was born in India and met Gandhi as a child. He told me how Gandhi inspired all colonized nations to fight for freedoms, not just India, all over Southeast Asia. He lamented how Gandhi has been co-opted and at times his life and legacy have been misinterpreted and misunderstood. He told me that he still remembers Gandhi's remarkable presence as a child. So how do I came to Gandhi studies? I know students ask me that question. So about 2 decades ago, when my friend, Professor James Earl from the University of Oregon, introduced me to Gandhi studies. I was an Indian philosophy scholar, or student rather, and then he introduced me to Gandhi studies. I did not know much about Gandhi at that time, his epic life, his influential teachings. We are glad that Professor Earl is here with us and will be presenting tomorrow afternoon. Professor Earl, could you please stand? My mentor, my teacher. My study of Gandhi's life, his writings, speeches, letters, and about him has been quite revealing to me, and my views about Gandhi has evolved. Gandhi's writings and words have now recorded in 100 volumes and 50,000 pages. Imagine studying Gandhi. There are more than 500 biographies about Gandhi and thousands of scholarly books that analyze his life and legacy, and they continue to grow each year. As a student and teacher, I realized that to really understand him, we must look at his journey, his struggles, his writings, his conversation with his critics. He was very good with speaking with his critics, and his actions. Gandhi's life represents a journey of a man who did not claim to be perfect. And he was not a perfect man because he was a human being. But he did not hesitate to admit his failings and faults, which many of us don't have courage to do that. Who did not have all answers to all the problems, and at times his answers were simply either too idealistic or not correct. However, it is refreshing that as a politician, he often admitted his mistakes publicly. Can you believe in today's world? People saying, I messed up, sorry, I won't do it again. We want to hide it. He called his mistakes Himalayan blunders and seriously engaged with his critics and sought to uphold truth. George Orwell once remarked, simply regarded as a politician and compared with the other leading political figures of our time, which was a long time ago. And now, if he was talking to you, I don't know what will happen. How clean a smell he has managed to leave behind. How clean a smell he managed to leave behind. So Gandhi was committed to secure India's freedom from the British rule, but he was equally dedicated to providing constructive programs for uplifting all and addressing the issues of health, sanitation, poverty, use of local products, Hindu-Muslim unity, equal dignity for all, improving the lives of those who live in rural areas, systemic structures of violence. I mean, he really talked about various structures of systemic violence. Hindu laws relegating women to lower status, and child marriage, all the laws that were relegating women to lower status. Gandhi's ideas are complex, multifaceted, and dynamic. They demand serious study, and these scholars who are here and activists, they have done so. Not simply cliched saying and caricatured images. The two individuals you're going to meet tonight who have done serious study of Gandhi's writings, experimented with the methods of nonviolence in American civil rights movement and for securing the rights of other marginalized groups. These two individuals are Reverend James Lawson Jr. and Dr. Mary Elizabeth King. Now this is a moment we are all waiting for. It's my honor and privilege to introduce Reverend James Lawson. Reverend James Lawson is the architect of nonviolent movement in the United States. Reverend Lawson learned Gandhian tactics of nonviolence during his visit to India in 1953. He had been studying before that, much before Martin Luther King Jr. visited India. He worked in the civil rights movement, and his work is legendary. He was invited by Martin Luther King Jr. to join him to end injustices and oppression. He calls Dr. King Martin. So that's something, we will never call that, right? Dr. King called Reverend Lawson a great theoretician of nonviolence. He developed unique tactics of training to desegregate Nashville and much of the South. What I found intriguing in his method was his unique and innovative training to prepare student activists. If you haven't seen a documentary, A Force More Powerful, I highly recommend it. He sacrificed much in service to peace and justice. He chose to go to prison instead of war. He suffered physical assaults and verbal humiliations during protests. I believe that as a scholar and a student of Gandhi, that Gandhi's methods of nonviolence and passive resistance became known to the world because of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend James Lawson's adaptation of Gandhi's philosophy in a new context. And Gandhi had predicted that in 1930s. He said that if because of this civil rights movement, my methods will be all over the world. But it wasn't just the US South where Reverend Lawson worked. He has worked nonviolently for peace and justice for workers in hotels and fieldworks, including alongside Cesar Chavez. And he's still active on behalf of students. This morning, Reverend Lawson went to the Sunnyside High School to meet with these students. It has a long day for him. He chose to go to the Sunnyside and meet the kids where they were. So he continues his work for teaching students. He's continued to be active on behalf of students today, and he continues to hold workshops every month in LA if you want to go attend it. I met him in 2016, and he was difficult to find. He doesn't do Facebook, he doesn't do email, nobody can find his phone number, but he has been one of the most valuable finds of my life. He is a living embodiment of Gandhi's philosophy and principle. I did not meet Gandhi, I'm too young, but I'm so grateful I met him. And now you will also have the chance to meet him and hear him. Please join me in welcoming Reverend James Lawson.
I am pleased and delighted delighted to be back at Fresno State again this evening, to be in this place and to be with so many of you who are here. I want to extend my thanks and appreciation for the invitation to this Gandhi conference. And we've already said once tonight that how important this conference is and how grateful we are to Professor Veena Howard for pulling it all together. So I will not repeat what I had in my head to say at all, except to say that we do want clearly to acknowledge that. I hope I do not talk too long, but it is now 6:30. We're supposed to end at 7:30? Something? 7:30? Huh? 7:45. All right. Well, I have a note in front of me that says, keep your hands out of your pocket. See the people. Look straight ahead. I remind myself of these things. It also says 30 minutes only. I hope I can fulfill that last 30 minutes. I want to say a word about Mary Elizabeth King because probably Mary Elizabeth King, who was a volunteer to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of which I was one of the founders and organizers of the conference. She is probably the only other person that I know of out of, not the civil rights movement, but the Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent Movement of America. I hope you heard that because it's critically important. She's the only person besides myself who has continued to give study and teaching of Gandhian nonviolence and of nonviolent struggle, both here in the United States and in other places as well. She's an outstanding scholar and author of some of the best studies of nonviolence in the 20th century. So I'm more than delighted that she is here to share in part with all of us today. She represents our struggle in the mid part of the 20th century very, very well, better than most people, I think, that I know of. I want to say a word also about the fact that one of the reasons a Gandhi conference is critical is because the Academy has really left out of its teaching, by and large, the nonviolent struggle of people over the centuries of the human family. So we get these American textbooks on history in high school, and they exclude the struggle of labor for the Social Security Act, as an example, or the struggle of the women of the 1910 to 1920 movement, Ellis Paul and Lucy Burns and others, who used nonviolent tactics to force a president of the United States to change his mind and to make women's suffrage, the 19th Amendment, a major speech before both houses of Congress when he kept saying he would never do it, that he couldn't do it. And in wartime, the Lucy Burns, Ellis Paul segment of the women's suffrage movement forged a power and a spirituality that caused Congress to pass the 19th Amendment and then sufficient number of states to vote on it so that this has been mentioned today, August 19th, 1920, we have an anniversary of that 19th Amendment. It did not come from the 17th century, mind you. It came because women put together a nonviolent struggle that made it inevitable. So I lift, and the academy tends not to teach that. I never saw that in a history book in college or in graduate school. Never saw that issue. So the academy I have a real issue with the academy, even though I continue to teach at places like UCLA in LA. The academy, especially the social sciences and history, have left out the ancient history of what can be called soul force struggle. It is not true that all of the conflicts of the human race across maybe 4,000 years of written history were primarily conflicts that were managed by the use of violence. That's not in the books, and the academy needs to correct it because it is critical, it seems to me, for the change of our country and for what I want to say this evening. And so a conference like this can help point the way towards the universities becoming more aware of things like in the United States, where there have been creative boycotts and strikes and picket lines and demonstrations against segregation in 1840. In Pennsylvania, New England, all illustrations of soul struggle that are critical, it seems to me, and important. I want to take a little excursion to say that before I met Gandhi, I had been practicing nonviolent struggle for something like 9 years. I did not call it that. But as I look back, I know that my own perspective on soul force comes from my parents and their interpretation of the religion of the Bible, their interpretation of the religion of Jesus. It was non-dogmatic, but primarily on how we human beings can live together and work together. And I know that I learned the way of love, which is one of the definitions of nonviolence and soul force, in that my dad's church in Massillon, Ohio, from age 4 to age 18, where I had a loving congregation who felt that that we lived in a climate of love. And it was there that I learned the black song. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Or where I learned as a child, go down, Moses, go down, way down to Egypt land. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Those are some of the patterns out of the Black experience that I grew in, and that convinced me that the way of compassion and truth was the way of strength and the way of nobility and the way of character. Then in 1947, I read for the first time Gandhi's autobiography. And Gandhi's autobiography not only persuaded me of the power of the creative force of the universe for personal living, but also then changed my language so that I began to use the terms that Gandhi used and introduced to life. Nonviolence and soul force, life force, God force, truth force, and the other terms that are so important to me today. So Gandhi affirmed in me, where I was exploring the fact that struggle against racism, which began for me at age 4, that I did not have to become an alternate racist to resist the ills and criminalization of racism. And that has greatly expanded my understanding in my life. I want to put a different edge on the meaning of Gandhi for our times, because you may or may not realize that Gandhi said, nonviolence is a science of social change. If we learn it and use it, it will never fail. If we use it with discipline and creativity, strategic sensibilities, it will work every time to bring about political, social, economic, spiritual, and moral change. And I would want to lay that on you, that the history now of the recovery of this science of nonviolence is weighed with a record from history, a record from the lives of millions of people, a record of all sorts of demonstrations that took place in the 20th century and earlier. So it is time for the Academy to maybe adopt Gandhian's notion, which is also one of the things that King followed in. Nonviolence is a science of social change, a science of how you bring about justice and freedom and equality in the beloved community. So I propose to you today that we see Gandhi as the father of nonviolence, not the inventor, but the father of nonviolence, who, like Albert Einstein, used his life around the same time that Einstein was understanding the theories of relativity and the use of gravity and force, and presented it to science and became, therefore, the father of science, the father of physics out of the 20th century. I want to insist that Gandhi is the father of nonviolence. And I want to go further to say that back at the end of the 20th century, Time magazine did a contest of several years in which they wanted to try to name the top figure of the 20th century. And the 2 finalists were Albert Einstein. Look this up on the internet and get that copy of that edition of the final choice of the man of the century. And the runner-up was Gandhi. So a very influential journal and corporation in this nation called Einstein and Gandhi the 2 most significant figures of the 20th century. And I'm here to try to say that I would say that Gandhi is the superior figure because he did the hard, relentless work of learning and studying, observing and thinking and preparation, and discovered nonviolence as an ancient force in human history, and pulled it together in a fashion that he could talk to us about it as a science, but also as a practical way of transforming our own lives and transforming the lives of others. And in that sense, I honor Gandhi tonight and speak of his work. I have to tell you something. My friend Professor Howard, I have not yet decided to connect with the notion of calling this beautiful planet or the world family. I have not yet reconciled myself to speaking of it as global. I happen to think that that language is an effort to codify the earth. I have a beautiful gold that sits, a beautiful globe that sits right to my left of a computer on my desk at home. It is a pure glass globe, a beautiful thing that helps me to think about the world and to meditate on the world and the struggles of the human race. But I want nonviolent struggle and thought to demand that it's not a globe. It is a beautiful, living planet that, to the best of our knowledge, is the only planet in the universe that has sustained and supported and created life such as we know life. I want to talk about it not as a globe at all, but to talk it as about the home of this 7 or 8, 9 billion human beings who represent so many different shades and so many different creeds and so many different nationalities and ethnicities and countries, represent so many different forms of understanding culture and life, so many different languages. I wanted us to understand that about ourselves before this globalization goes wild and turns us into artificial intelligence rather than as people. So here's the major point I wish to make tonight, and you can. The second major point. First major point is this. The world in which you and I live is a world that has been largely shaped by the underbelly entities and demands of Western civilization. The world, as our Pentagon says every year, is not a dangerous world. It has been made more vulnerable and more fragile by, in many ways, the thrust of Western civilization. The Western exploration of the 15th century that sent ships over to discover Africa and South America and Australia and North America also carried with them some soldiers and cannon and guns for the purpose of conquest. Those ships also carried people who expected they might find gold and wealth and use it for themselves. They had a mandate coming out of Spain or France or Portugal that said that if you find a land that has no Christian ruler, then you can claim that land for yourself and for your king or for your queen. So that Western exploitation was not, as we are taught in the United States, all good or all wonderful for the shape and forming of the world or the shape or forming of the human race. It brought with it the dirty notion that the best, most superior civilization is European civilization. It brought the dirty notion that Christianity is the only valuable, true religion in the world, and you must be Christian. It brought the demand that your cultures must submit to our culture from the European area. Now, not all of that was the case, but I want to push hard the fact that the Western civilization has been the major intellectual, spiritual, moral force for the world in which we live. ISIS did not make this world like it is. We made ISIS. Here in the United States, we falsely assume that we are the best nation in the world and that we have the right to tell all other nations to do as we want them to do. So my major point, Gandhi as the father of nonviolence represents the necessity of the world choosing a new paradigm. Not the one that we live under primarily, but a different paradigm. Gandhi represents the challenge that Western civilization, as it introduced so much into the world, must change. It must move from a conquest civilization and a domination understanding of the earth to a notion of justice and truth. It must move from its preoccupation with power as being primarily lodged in the gun or the bomb to a notion that power is primarily the power of life and compassion and truth, and that life needs to be organized not under the notion that human beings are commodities and things, but under the notion that human beings are the precious gifts of life for the earth and for the world. So put this as why Gandhi is important. That he provokes us. He challenges us. Many of the issues with which we contend today, Gandhi thought about them and talked about them and worked to change them back in his own day. If you're talking about women's equality, justice, gender justice, well, Gandhi was concerned about it in South Africa more than 100 years ago. What I'm trying to say to you is this, that the Gandhian understanding of nonviolence as power, the creative force of the universe, is a question to Western civilization and to every nation. We pursue the course the world is taking, and we doom ourselves either with a whimper, as W.A. Auden said, or with a bang. We either allow ourselves to be exhausted through chaotic climate needs, or by the use of chemicals that pollute the earth, or the use of plastic that is beginning to cause great damage in all our oceans. We continue that course, we extinguish ourselves, and we may very well turn our planet into an ice planet. We follow the course of the United States, whether in Vietnam or in Syria or in Iraq or in Iran. We follow that course and we commit ourselves to the continued chaos in our own country, in our world. We support the military operations of the United States, 800 military bases in more than 100 countries, ignoring that we need to be a people who have as our chief budgetary needs the quality of life for every baby born and for every boy and girl in our land, everywhere across the 50 states. We continue that course, and we therefore put off the need for us to become a more humanistic society. We follow the course of our land, this United States of America, and we prepare for the massive violence that will explode in Africa, where our Pentagon and our policies now have 6,000 troops on the ground in 43 countries. Laying the framework for a future not of Africa being able to rise up and awake and become its own people, but to be a place like Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and wherever else we are operating today. I say this as strongly as I can say it, which is why I contend that we need to understand more diligently and more faithfully from a nonviolent perspective the work of Martin Luther King Jr., who agreed with Gandhi. Nonviolence or non-existence, co-annihilation, coexistence, which calls for paradigmatic change in the way in which we live and operate and understand ourselves and understand this nation that is the USA. And so I propose that if you want to understand Gandhi better, then I say to you, make the nonviolent movement of America, 1953 to 1973, a place of research and study and examination, which is not being done. Period. In that 20-year period, in at least 18 of those years, there was a major nonviolent campaign in a place like Birmingham or Mississippi, the Freedom Summer movement, Freedom Summer, or in Albany, Georgia. Major campaign of direct action that began to change the face of the nation. And then along with that major campaign, there were many other kinds of demonstrations around, especially the Southeast and the South Central, but around the nation. Los Angeles called their campaign in the 60s the Civil Rights Movement. It was a multi-creedal, multidisciplinary, multi-people ethic for 10, 12, 13 years. Chicago called it the Civil Rights Movement. But in Memphis, we called it the Freedom Movement. The sanitation strike, we called it a movement for justice and equality. In Birmingham, Alabama, we called it the Freedom Movement. That movement demonstrated protracted struggle and demonstrated a high level of personal and social discipline. The activism in the United States today will not cut the mustard for the change we need in the United States. Will not do it. Gandhi insisted if you want social change, Martin Luther King Jr. the same, if you want social change, you need to use nonviolent strategy, methods, discipline. A political social movement that's going to help dismantle the injustice and allow justice to increase will be a movement that is systematic and disciplined. One of the things that was said in the press, in the media, in the 1960s was about how so many people in so many different places expressed or seemed to reflect in their sit-ins or picket walks or swim-ins or church-ins or economic boycotts represented such a magnificent picture of personal and group discipline. That's what Gandhi said is needed for every social movement. You cannot have people running all around with all kinds of noise and agendas and theses. If it's going to be a movement that means a better scene than we have today in the United States, it's going to mean solid understanding of nonviolent, soul force, energy, preparation, and work. This is what King Gandhi represents. This movement in the United States is largely neglected because it is called too often the civil rights movement, when we rarely use that term except in certain circles among us. We talk freedom and equality and justice. We talk the beloved community. We talk the dismantling of the segregationist system, all of its ideologies, all of its institutions, all of it in every way possible, so that we could then have a people freed of those shackles on the mind and on the spirit and the imagination, so that we could then work to create a different society. The present moment in the United States is still a part of the awakening of the nation that came out of the movement of nonviolence, Rosa Parks, Martin King movement of nonviolence. And another part of that interpretation for me is this, that our present political scene may very well get worse before it gets better. I know no one wants to think about that. President Donald Trump is an icon of the forces of spiritual wickedness in our country that have for too long gripped the minds and the spirits of too many people, the forces of sexism and racism, plantation capitalism and violence. It's those poisons that have produced the Trump in our midst today. He is probably the worst of the tyrants who are available to our country. The next tyrant will be probably far more sophisticated and modeled and handsome, with the right language and the right sort of way to attract people. Beware that what we experience is but a surface of the forces of wrong that still inhabit too many of us. And I see little or no leadership that recognizes the depth of our problem. We do not have a political party that wants justice for all, equality for all. We, the people, may have to produce a party that will want the dismantling of gender inequality and of sexism and violence, so that new ways of democratic understanding and truth might have the chance to move in our country with great vigor and power. So, again, the challenge of Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas K. Gandhi, is the singular question. Will there be the kinds of people's movements of nonviolence in the United States or across our world that will help the human race to gain new power centers that will change the direction of the world over the last 500 or 600 years? Our response to Gandhi and to that paradigm may, in fact, not only shape you, but shape me as well. Now, Gandhi talked about the long, arduous struggle for truth and justice. Martin King spoke of the long, bitter, beautiful struggle. I would end simply on that note. We of the human family have not yet tapped the creative forces of life, of the universe, in a fashion. So that we have some understanding of Gandhi and King saying, struggle ahead is long, tedious, in some ways dangerous. In the meantime, however, those of us who commit ourselves to nonviolent soul force, life force, love force, truth force, beauty force, and learn of that history and that method, that form of strategy, that form of protracted struggle. We must be ready to, on a daily basis, understand the passionate, the bitter, as King at one point said, but beautiful struggle. I am often astonished at where people commit themselves to that struggle, to that work in the spirit and power and truth of love. I am often astonished by what that means in terms of nobility and humanity. And King and Gandhi put their fingers on it. Nonviolence is not just a phrase or a methodology. It is a way of life. It's a way of being. It's a way of struggle. It's a way of doing the truth. It's a way of living. So I commend it, especially to all the students who are here, but to all of us, to reclaim the life that can be called the life using the most creative force of the universe. You will not be disappointed. You will be astounded. Thank you.
I don't think very many people that can help you see some harsh realities and at the same time give you hope. I think that's what's happened here, wouldn't you agree? Yeah. What's going to happen now is I'm going to introduce Mary Elizabeth King, who is going to give some brief reflections on what we've experienced right now and what's going on, what she's thinking about right now. And I really appreciate, thank you so much, Reverend Lawson. And I really appreciate him affirming who Mary Elizabeth King is. Because if you look in the bio, it says that uniquely among SNCC personnel, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, she has built her academic specialty on the study of nonviolent civil resistance and is an acclaimed authority on the subject. And I appreciate him affirming that about you, because if you wondered, now you know, right? Now you know. She's a prominent scholar of Gandhi and professor of peace and conflict studies. And I really appreciate the fact that she has authored 5 major books in the field and around Gandhi's legacy. She's now a professor of peace and conflict studies at the UN-affiliated University for Peace, the main campus in Costa Rica. She is also a distinguished Rothermere American Institute Fellow at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. You could read more about her in her bio. We don't want to take up too much time because we want to hear directly from her. Let's welcome Mary Elizabeth King.
I had to make a slight adjustment so that I could see each and every person, because when I came up here before, I realized that I would not be able to see the front rows. Now I can see you all. Well, I'm very deeply moved to be here and very grateful for the invitation. And Professor Veena Howard has just been a joy to work with in making these arrangements. I'm delighted to know about what is happening in this university and the leadership of the many people that I've met in only one day being here. Now, Professor Howard asked that I give some personal reflections. So there are many things I could be saying about what Reverend Lawson talked with us about, but I'm going to follow your request. When I went to work for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, I had very, very little to offer. I had just been graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University. I had almost nothing to offer apart from the fact that I could read and write. But when I was in campus, I had traveled with the campus YWCA to Nashville, Atlanta, and Tuskegee in my senior year. And because of that trip, I met people like John Lewis, also in SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, SNCC pronounced. I met Julian Bond, James Foreman, so many people that I would then soon be working with. But how did I get into SNCC? It wasn't listed in the yellow pages. A telephone call came as I was about to be graduated, asking if I would come for an interview with Miss Ella Baker and Professor Howard Zinn. And so I phoned my parents and said, I'm not coming home. I'm flying to North Carolina and then I told them what had happened. So I was invited into the movement by one of the advisors of SNCC. SNCC didn't do everything right, but it had brilliant advisors, chief of whom was Reverend Lawson, who was also uniquely the primary advisor to Dr. King's organization. You need to understand historically the role that he occupied. He was the major agent for the transmission of knowledge on the Gandhian struggles and Gandhian philosophies, theories, and practice to the United States, and the primary advisor to Dr. King's organization and to the student wing. He has a unique spot in United States history. Don't lose sight of that. So I went on to SNCC staff at $20 a week before taxes, which was double what the field secretaries working for SNCC got out in Arkansas or Alabama or Mississippi. And because I was able to read and write, I was asked to go to work with Julian Bond, handling communications. Well, what does that mean? And in a sense, communications is nonviolent resistance. Everything we do in nonviolent resistance is communications, whether it's a silent vigil or carrying a placard or releasing a news release or issuing a statement. It's all communications. It's communications of the claims and the demands, the grievances, the oppression, what needs to be altered. Well, for us, it also had a life-saving element, because if I could only get a reporter to a jail where one of our people was held or a local person was held, it might save their life. So I was put to work on communications, which allowed me to use what I had learned as an English major. And as a result, I began to be exposed to the work of Reverend Lawson in helping to guide us in understanding the basic theories, the basic philosophies, the basic practices of civil resistance. And I would have to say that apart from my wonderful parents, he has possibly been the most important person in my life. And I'm in my early 20s. So what I'm going to talk with you about tonight and tie it together with him is about this discussion that we're having, this wonderful dialogue, is a matter of lifelong knowledge. This is not something passing. This is something that can change your life and potentially has the ability to alter our society. But how did the knowledge get to the United States? Well, I've already mentioned Reverend Lawson, but let me also say that African American-owned newspapers were reporting diligently on what was going on in India, including the situation with the untouchables. So this was significant. Reverend Lawson's family subscribed to the Pittsburgh Courier. So even as a child, he was reading newspapers coming in, reporting from India, and beginning to be exposed. He starts studying Gandhi in 1947. Those African American newspapers were very significant because the editor of the Pittsburgh Courier had traveled to India. So they are bringing reportage from India directly of the Gandhian struggles. Then the historian Sudarshan Kapoor has documented that for 40 years there was a steady flow of Black leaders traveling to India to visit with those in the various satyagrahas, but also to learn for themselves how something that they thought that might be applicable in the United States could work, to understand what was going on. It went on from 1919 to 1955, a steady flow of people like Howard Thurman, Benjamin Mays, the president of Morehouse, whose chapels weekly are when Martin Luther King first heard about Gandhi. There was a steady flow of African American leadership traveling to the United States. When Bishop Edward Carroll of the Methodist Church met with Gandhi in 1936, Gandhi asked him, "Why don't you have all of the Negroes in America stay home on a certain day?" I happen to have known Bishop Carroll as a child because my father also was a Methodist minister, and he was a frequent guest in our home. This is the kind of intelligence that was flowing as a result of those leaders traveling to India. With Reverend Lawson, we got someone who was a pivotal theoretician for us. When he decided to oppose conscription in the Korean War and to become a conscientious objector, he knew that he might be in prison. And indeed, he was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, of which he served 13 months. The Methodist Church went to the federal government and ask that they release him from prison and allow him to travel to India where he could teach. And so he went to India for 3 years and taught in a college right in the crossroads of India. This was very important because it gave him a chance to visit the sites of the various satyagrahas and to meet with people who were satyagrahis, that is, working in those struggles, so that he developed a knowledge that no one else had in the Western world. There is no one else who had that exposure other than Reverend Lawson. Even before he went to India, though, he had realized that there needed to be what he called mass education and training on nonviolent direct action techniques. So he already realized that the United States of America was in need of what was happening in India, of that knowledge, that we needed that knowledge as much as anyone else in the world. Now, I can't begin to tell you how much I learned from him, but I did, in preparation for meeting you tonight, spend a bit of time thinking deeply about what I had learned from Reverend Lawson. And I remember his exact words one day when he said to us, "They will call us radicals, but you need to understand what the word radical means. It means going to the root." He would talk with us about how pursuing justice must be combined with action. Just believing something's not enough. He would talk with us about the importance of openness, that there be no secrecy. It's one of the characteristics of nonviolent struggle. Openness with authorities and officials. Transparent communication of your claim. Respect for the opponent. Viewing the opponent as someone who ought to be enlisted to your side, rather than someone to be criticized or castigated or put down or worse. He would say, we're not looking for victory over anyone. We want justice for everyone. And he would talk with us about the connection between the means and the ends. And those of us who grew up in the United States, unfortunately, have grown up in a society in which the predominant viewpoint is that the ends justifies the means. This is mostly what we hear coming from Washington. Within the movement, however, we were understanding what Gandhi meant about how you fight affects the results that you get. So today I'm older than Miss Baker and Professor Zinn were when they contacted me. But what I want to suggest to you is that you have an opportunity to be in this for life. On his way home from India, Reverend Lawson went to Oberlin College to prepare for further studies. And he happened to have lunch with Martin Luther King Jr. at Oberlin, who was there to give a lecture. As he talked with him, I don't believe Dr. King had his doctorate at the time, so I'm not going to call him Dr. King because I'm not really sure of that historical point. But as he talked about what he had been doing for 3 years and learning about the Gandhian struggles, Martin Luther King said to him, "Come south immediately. We don't have anyone like you," which was true. Martin Luther King was still using the term passive resistance, which Gandhi was very, very disturbed by. Disturbed enough so that while in South Africa, he made sure that another term could be coined. So Professor Howard mentioned the constructive program this evening, and it went by very, very quickly. But I'm just going to do this fast, but I'm going to mention something important. In 1941, Gandhi published what was basically a booklet called the Constructive Program. And what he was saying is that with some problems that are so deeply egregious, so oppressive, so negative, the best thing to do is to withdraw from the source of that oppression and to begin building institutions, construct new institutions. That's where the name constructive program comes from. Begin building the new order while you are still living in the old order. This is a very, very potent concept. It's surprising to me how many scholars I meet who think they understand what they call the U.S. civil rights movement, who don't understand the meaning of this at all. And what Gandhi laid out were 17 different components, which Professor Howard enumerated some of tonight. Extremely important, but this idea that while you are still under terrible pressure, you can begin creating the institutions of your future is a very deeply potent one indeed. In Mississippi, in 1964, we adopted this in a very serious way. We had credit unions. We organized cooperatives. We set up an alternative political party because the constructive program encourages parallel institutions or alternative institutions. You have a wicked such and such, create a new one that's clean. You have a filthy political situation in which only white people are allowed in the Democratic Party. I'm speaking of the way we spoke. Create an alternative party. So we created the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and we challenged the seating of the all-white delegation at the National Convention. We almost won. Almost won. I can't go into the detail, and I won't, because I see Professor Howard is looking at me. But I want to point out that one of the things that we were able to do in SNCC, and SNCC was largely the leader in the Mississippi Freedom Summer, even though we had a consolidated organization that allowed all of the civil rights organizations to be involved. SNCC had something like 120 field secretaries in SNCC. I was just one, and I was doing communications the whole time. And as a matter of fact, there's an article that was published on Monday about my work in communications that Professor Howard has had duplicated. There's a picture of me working in the midst of the tumult of the headquarters of the Mississippi Freedom Summit. And you see me talking quietly on the phone with a reporter. That's what I did most days. I did it for often 12 hours a day, many, many weeks in which I worked 7 days a week. We also were able to break the back of the terror groups and vigilantes that had controlled the Southland basically since the tragic end of Reconstruction. And the way we did it was with nonviolent discipline. Reverend Lawson spoke at some length about the importance of discipline. This is a word that the millennials don't like, I notice. It's fundamentally extremely important in the success of nonviolent action. Because of our discipline, because of the way we maintain that communications program, we had no support from the FBI, which James Comey admitted in 2016. He went to Birmingham to the church where the 4 little girls were killed by the Ku Klux Klan, and he admitted that we in the FBI were late. Well, that's a very minimal way of putting it. I mean, we all knew that the FBI was in collusion with the Ku Klux Klan and the terror groups. But as a result, as a consequence of the 60,000 some local people who registered to be involved, and think that there are tens of thousands of other people in the Mississippi Delta, the African American, Black Belt counties in which there might be 85% Black population, we were able to break the back of that violence in that summer. Regrettably, we lost 3 of our workers James Chaney, who was with CORE, Michael Schwerner, also with CORE, and Andrew Goodman, a volunteer who had just arrived from New York. The country, the United States, was deeply affected by the tragic losses of these three young men. And it gave us an opening, a listening began. And there began to be some changes. I think we have to be skeptical about legislative changes, but there began to be some changes. I want to mention one thing in closing, which is what I'm here to tell you tonight is that this is something you can do for life. I also want to share with you that our knowledge is inadequate. About 5 years ago, I went to see the head of the Oxford University Press political publishing wing in Oxford. And I told him that Dr. Jean Sharp had approached me and said, Mary, I think you need to do a study on a struggle where everything we think we know is probably wrong. Everything we think we know in the literature is probably wrong. You've got to take on this project. Well, you can appeal to me on the basis of duty more easily than anything else. If I think something is my duty, I'm much more likely to do it with enthusiasm than any other motivation. You can't get me with money or prestige, but you can get me by saying, Mary, it's your duty to work on this. What the Oxford University Press editor told me is, Mary, we have no one in Oxford who can work on anything like this. We just don't have the capacity. You've got to go to the Oxford University Press in New Delhi, which I did. And in 2015, they published a book that resulted from 15 years of work. The United States Institute of Peace gave me a grant. I had a grant from my institute in Oxford. It took me 15 years, many, many trips. I spent my life in the archives in Kerala and in New Delhi. And finally, the report was produced. Scholars like Richard Gregg and Joan Bondurant were idealizing and romanticizing something that had not happened. They said that the Brahmins in the village of Vykom, spelled V-Y-K-O-M, had been so affected by the suffering of the untouchables that they changed their practices and embraced the Dalits, which is another name for untouchables. It's from the language of Ambedkar, his mother tongue. There is no substantiation for that at all. What I'm here to tell you tonight is that there are many Gandhian struggles that are as yet undocumented. I hope that some of the students that I've met today will think about this seriously. We need more people to be doing more work on the Gandhian struggles that have never had any social scientists look at them. The Indian social scientists got involved in subaltern studies. They decided not to pay any attention to the Gandhian struggles, basically. I want to invite you to join me in working on unresearched Gandhian struggles. And I also want to share with you that you will get tremendous energy and uplift and gratification by taking on this topic that Professor Howard and Reverend Lawson have elaborated on and brought so many brilliant people together for. This is something you can do for life. This is lifelong knowledge I'm talking about. And remember that knowledge is not like a great big brick, unchanging. It's something that's always altering. So there really is a tremendous need for young scholars and young organizers. Tremendous. Thank you very much.
Let's give Mary King another round of applause. You know, I can't help but think when you think of the folks that we lost during the movement, that they are even here, right? That they're even here is a wonderful thing, and we are so honored by your presence, both of you. Our time is far spent, but we do want to give an opportunity for some questions. Do you remember who Veena said all of this is for at the beginning? The students. We have such a short period of time, and so we're going to allow for questions, but we're going to allow it from the students. Is that all right with everyone? So students, this is your opportunity. We're only going to be able to get 3 or 4 questions. So if you're a student and you want to ask a question of Reverend Lawson or of Mary King, let me see you throw your hands up in the air very quickly. 1, 2, 3, come on forward. 4. I think that's what I see. Perfect. Come forward, 2 at this mic and 2 at that mic. And since you're the first one at the mic, we'll start there.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here and have this opportunity. My question is for you, Reverend Lawson. What do you say to the young people today who have taken their frustration regarding social injustice and released them by means of social media posts rather than true field work?
I didn't get part of that question. Who go with USA culture rather than nonviolence? Is that the meaning of the question?
No, my question, let me rephrase it, was what would you say to the young people today who take their frustrations in regards to social injustice and release them by means of social media posts rather than true field work? Like posting on Facebook or Instagram that their beliefs and how they feel about injustices rather than seeking true work.
Well, you've had a good, excellent example in the last few days, last week or week before, of the thousands of demonstrations that went all across the world, social media, by the 16-year-old high school person who started a strike in Sweden over the issue of climate chaos or climate change. So that indicates the power of the media used rightly in social media. On the other side of the coin, though, those demonstrations represented only one tiny tactic or methodology of the nonviolent tactics that are available. A much more important tactic is developing a protracted struggle. So the question that could be asked is, will each of the major marches in every city across the earth now divide up into a strategic, protracted struggle locally, in which there are demonstrations that may go on every week at places where the power levels can be pulled until such time as those power levers begin to move in the direction that those protracted struggles want them to go in. The nonviolent movement of the United States was not mainly large marches. We were mainly, for example, 1960, 59, 60, the sit-in campaign, that was primarily sit-in campaigns going into restaurants, theaters, 5 and 10 cent stores, week after week after week. In Nashville, we did demonstrations 2 days a week, Saturday and Wednesday afternoon and evening. So, thank you very much. So the question, the nonviolence, it seems to me that Gandhi persistently pushed was not the nonviolence of major marches, but the nonviolence of protracted struggles with targets and goals, many of which could be accomplished. Does that?
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
So there's a role perhaps for both, but in the United States, we need a protracted struggle over many months of work at the local level.
Thank you.
Without announcing that you're going to be out there every week.
Yeah.
You must not give away the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question here.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. So I study political science and philosophy here at Fresno State. And through my studies, I've came across this term of state. And basically what that means in political science is a country in normal terms. And with the notion of state, there comes this characteristic of having a monopoly on the use of force or violence on your people. And I just wanted to know what you thought of that as Gandhi scholars and what that means to you in terms of, do you view that as a positive kind of notion of like protecting your people, or do you feel like the injection of force or violence is just inherently bad?
I can't understand. Do you understand the question?
Your question is about up against the violence of the state. How do you protect your movement?
No, what I'm saying is that a requirement, like in the definition of what a state is that the state has the monopoly of use of force or violence on its people. Right. And what I'm suggesting is that, do you, like, through my study, I don't like that. I don't think that a state should have a monopoly of use or force. And I know that through your talk, you mentioned a lot about politics, and I was wondering if you had a standpoint on that particular characteristic of a state.
Yes, that's, of course, Lenin and Marx both recognized that the state very often has a heavy amount of control of the power in a community. But Gandhi and others in this area of nonviolence have said that state power requires the consent of the people, even under dictatorship, even under tyranny. And that if people begin to remove that consent, even silently, no longer support it, then that power is under real threat. Does that make any kind of sense? I'm
Yes,
quoting
it does.
some of the literature now that is available.
It does. Thank you.
Could I please add a couple of words to that? I also have another article, I believe, which I've written just last week, in which I'm talking with the critics of Gandhi who are charging him with being racist or being this, that, and the other. And that's supposed to be available for you at this conference. It's been photocopied. Take a look at it, because in there I mentioned that in 1906, when he was in his early 30s in South Africa, Gandhi had figured out that no system can stand if the people stop cooperating and obeying. This is the core of his understanding of non-cooperation as the primary way that civil resistance works. So I want you in particular to get it, so you'll have, because the quote is in that article from Gandhi in 1906. And I think that will be something that you'll be able to find with the help of a librarian. You can go and read a little bit more of what he had figured out. It's one of the most profound discernments, because it challenges the origins of state power with which we have all been grown, all been brought up with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is MZ. I'm a public relations student here at Fresno State. I have one question for the both of you. As Mary had said that the millennial generation would not like that we have to be disciplined nowadays, especially to create social change. What suggestions do you have for us to be able to learn more discipline and also to spread it throughout our peers? Because as a public relations major, it is kind of my job to get ideas out there. And I feel like this is an idea worth sharing and it must be learned by more people.
What is at the heart of your question, the core?
What are your suggestions for us to get the idea out there and spread it towards more people in my generation?
What is the best idea for getting more people of your generation involved?
Yes, with nonviolence.
May I take a shot at this? Yes. One of the things that you may be interested in knowing is that quantitative scholars, that is people who are interested in numbers. I'm a qualitative scholar. I do long, deep case studies. But quantitative scholars studying hundreds of violent and nonviolent struggles since 1906.
Yeah.
What was the
1906 to 2006. Are you talking about?
Yes,
Erica?
yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Found that the violent struggles were less effective than the nonviolent struggles. This was earth-shaking data because people like Reverend Lawson had always suspected that this was the case, but finally we had some numerical data. So I think that this is something that you can find easily by going onto the web and looking for Erica Chenoweth. She writes often in the Washington Post and the New York Times, very accessible. I think that you will find that if you circulate some of the things that she's written, that you will have a lot of people following you and wanting to ask if you've got more.
All right, thank you.
And our final question.
Hi. So, Ms. King, you touched upon this a little bit before the last question, but I would just like to know both of your opinions on this. Many people have great reverence for Gandhi and his work through nonviolence. However, there are select few who believe he has much to be criticized for. And I would just like to know how would you address those people and their criticisms?
First of all, we must get you my 2 articles. But let me say that we have a tendency sometimes as human beings to think that we can look at what happened in previous eras, in past times, and judge it through our values and our perspectives of today. If you do that with Gandhi, you miss the authenticity and the truth of what was actually going on. He is born into a situation where there is a theoretical interpretation of purity from pollution that governs the caste system, which took thousands of years to develop in India. It's completely theoretical. He is there under British rule. Imperialism was supported by very deep racism. Reverend Lawson abutted this area tonight. So Gandhi grows up with theoretical arguments of inferiority. Racism on the one hand, untouchability on the other. He has to get rid of all that baggage before he can become the person that he was in maturity, where the entire human race is part of the same compass. So I would say to you that the most important thing with your colleagues is to say yes, but we cannot judge somebody by our standards. We have to understand their historical context. We also need to understand that as human beings, We are capable of growth. We are capable of evolution. And this is precisely what happened with Gandhi. Yes, of course, he couldn't grow up in British-ruled India under the caste system and not have some ideas about inferiority, including women. He thought like an upper caste, middle-class man, thought women belonged in the home, cloistered. But he would eventually lead the destruction of gendered hierarchies after he returned home from South Africa. He becomes an advocate. He wants women involved in all nonviolent struggles by 1920. He is encouraging women to take leadership in local struggles. He is really advocating for the involvement of women in all aspects of the work he's doing. It starts in South Africa with the Natal Indian strike, when his own wife and 3 other women go into the Transvaal to encourage a strike. You saw some footage of it today in the film. He becomes a leader of change. This is a remarkable alteration. We're all capable of that alteration. So talk with people in those terms.
Thank you.
Yes, who in 1900 or 1905, who among the world leaders or the business leaders of the world, who are the scholars of 1906 who were critical of racism, gender discrimination, critical of violence in economic structures? In that sense, Gandhi was a pioneer, as early on he begins to speak out against racism and caste and whatnot. Sometimes we in the King movement get criticized by academics and others. For an example, I've read 2 or 3 or 4 different volumes on black women in the movement. And in it, there will be a criticism that is sometimes nuanced, other times quite bold, that why didn't you all deal with the issue of women's equality? Well, who in 1955 had what women's group did you have around the country that was hammering away had what the Me Too people are talking about, or male chauvinism, or sexism, or the lack of equality of women? Who was doing that in 1940, 1955? In the United States? So you can't read back into the 1953, 73 nonviolent movement. You can't read back into that, whether women had a role to play or not. In actual fact, I would say to you, whether some have reported it or not, the bus boycott began because of black women who for at least 2 to 5 years were organizing and protesting against the mistreatment of black people in the buses in Montgomery. They even had a number of conferences with the mayor and the president of the bus company before the bus boycott. Those women are the ones who caused the bus boycott to happen. It's what he said. In Nashville, Tennessee, where SCLC and King and others, people who were committed to the bus boycott, were thinking about what's the next campaign, I deliberately tried to organize in Nashville with a number of other people who were friends of SCLC or affiliated with SCLC, a systematic 4-point Gandhian methodology to organize the sit-in campaign of Nashville, which we did. We chose a topic. We chose a demand for change. We had 6 months of meetings weekly to make the decision where we would act. We said we must have a nonviolent campaign in Nashville in order to show the nation that Montgomery was not an accident, that it can be done again and again and again. That was a part of our motivation. It was largely black women in Nashville who then boldly, maybe following the leadership of women in Montgomery, to change the strategy of the whole movement. They said to us, and I shiver when I still think about it, they said, we must desegregate downtown Nashville. Can you imagine that? I'll always remember my own thought as we came to that conclusion. I could not have chosen that target. I had not the slightest notion what the target should be, but it was black women whose understanding of segregation in Nashville and running and managing their families in Nashville, in a segregated city where most of the shopping was downtown, even grocery shopping, who persuaded me that they were right. No matter how big the target, no matter that no one else had chosen that as a target, they were right. So we had adopted the target. We will desegregate downtown Nashville. You have no idea what that meant. But that became then the target, dismantling Jim Crow law, Jim Crow practice. Do you have any ideas what it is to walk into a downtown area where you have signs that say, no wetback, no chink, no Jew, no colored, white only? This is how many cities across the country operated. And it wasn't just in the South. But in any case, they made the decision. So people want to talk about, well, you went, well, from my perspective, it was the women who helped us launch more than any other group the nonviolent campaigns of America, 1953 to 1973, and women who became the backbone of much of the movement.
Thank you.
Let's give our speakers another round of applause. It's really interesting to me. My second-born daughter and I were just last night having a conversation about allowing folks the chance to reform, right? From where they are at one point, do we allow them the grace, right, to reform or transform from where they were at one point in their life? So thank you for that. One more round of applause for our presenters.